The letter from the lawyer arrived on the same day Georgia Evans got fired from her job as a physical therapist, and she wondered if the universe was laughing at her or giving her a lifeline. She sat in her cramped apartment, staring at the words that made no sense. Her uncle Raymond, whom she had only met twice in her entire life, had died and left her his vineyard in Napa Valley. Not just the land, but the whole operation, including what the letter vaguely referred to as existing business arrangements. Georgia had never considered herself lucky. At 26, she had worked 3 jobs to pay off her student loans, lived in a studio apartment where the radiator clanged like a dying animal, and her last relationship had ended when her boyfriend told her she was too focused on survival to actually live. Now, holding this letter, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe, or terror. Possibly both. 2 weeks later, she stood at the edge of Sunset Ridge Vineyard, watching the California sun paint the rolling hills in shades of amber and gold. The property was breathtaking, rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon, but even her untrained eye could see the neglect. Weeds choked the pathways between vines, wooden trellises sagged, and the main house looked like it had not seen fresh paint in a decade. "You must be Georgia." She turned to find a man walking toward her from the direction of the winery building. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just slightly into his eyes and a tan that spoke of hours working outdoors. He wore jeans and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. When he got closer, she noticed his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like the ocean before a storm. "I am," she said, extending her hand. "And you are Connor Ingram, your uncle's business partner." His handshake was firm and warm. "I'm sorry for your loss. Raymond was a good man." "I barely knew him," Georgia admitted. "We met at my mother's funeral when I was 10 and once at a family reunion years ago. I did not even know he had a vineyard." Connor's expression shifted, something complicated passing across his face. "Raymond kept to himself, but he talked about you sometimes, said you were the only one in the family who had not given up." That struck her as strange, given how little they had known each other. But before she could respond, Connor gestured toward the rows of vines. "Want to see what you have inherited?" They walked through the property as the afternoon light mellowed into evening. Connor explained that Sunset Ridge sat on 40 acres, planted primarily with Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay grapes. Raymond had been struggling for the past 5 years, unable to keep up with the physical demands or the changing market. "What exactly does it mean that you are my business partner?" Georgia asked. Connor stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Raymond and I had an agreement. He owned the land and 60% of the business. I own the equipment, manage the winemaking process, and have 40%. We split profits accordingly, though there have not been many profits lately." "How bad is it?" "We are about 6 months from bankruptcy," Connor said bluntly. "The equipment needs upgrading. We have lost most of our distribution contracts, and the last 2 harvests were mediocre at best." "Your uncle had been considering selling to a development company before he died." Georgia felt her stomach sink. "So I inherited a sinking ship, more like a ship that could be saved if someone was willing to fight for it." Connor's gaze was steady, challenging. "The question is whether you want to fight or cash out." She looked around at the vineyard, at the sunset painting everything gold and purple, and felt that strange stirring again. Her whole life had been about surviving, about getting through the next shift, the next bill, the next disappointment. What if this was her chance to actually build something? "I want to try," she said. Connor's face broke into a smile that transformed him completely, softening the hard edges. Then we have a lot of work to do. The next morning, Georgia woke in her uncle's house, which was now technically her house, though it felt strange to think of it that way. The bedroom was sparse but comfortable, with windows that overlooked the vineyard. She could hear birds singing and the distant sound of machinery. When she went downstairs, she found Connor in the kitchen, already dressed for work and pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "You are here early," she said. "I live in the guest cottage," he explained, handing her a mug. "Raymond converted it years ago. Hope you do not mind." "Should I mind?" Some people might find it odd, having their business partner living on the property. Georgia took a sip of coffee. "It was strong and good. Seems practical to me. Besides, I have no idea what I am doing. I will probably need help at random hours." Connor laughed, a low, warm sound. "You will definitely need help. Come on, let me show you the operation." The winery building was larger than she expected, with massive steel tanks for fermentation, rows of oak barrels in a climate-controlled room, and equipment whose purpose she could only guess at. Connor walked her through the entire winemaking process, from harvest to bottling, his passion evident in every word. "You really love this," Georgia observed. "Wine is magic," Connor said simply. "Taking fruit from the earth and transforming it into something that can make people feel joy, celebrate moments, remember nights they will treasure forever." "Yeah, I love it." "How did you get into this?" Connor's expression clouded slightly. "Long story. The short version is I made a lot of money young doing something I hated, and I decided I would rather do something I loved even if it meant starting over." "What did you do before?" "Investment banking. Made my first million by 25. He said it matter-of-factly, without pride or shame. "Spent the next 3 years miserable, working 100-hour weeks, making rich people richer. Then my father had a heart attack, and I realized I was heading down the same path. So I quit, went to Europe, learned winemaking, and came back to California to find a place to put down roots." Georgia processed this. "You are a millionaire." "Technically, yes, though most of it is tied up in investments and this place." Connor met her eyes. "Does that bother you?" "Why would it bother me? Some people get weird about money." Georgia thought about her empty bank account, her student loans, the years of scraping by. "I have never had enough money to have opinions about it, but I suppose I am glad you are not broke, because that means this place might actually have a chance." Connor grinned. "I like your attitude. Come on, let me show you the vines." They spent the morning walking the rows, and Connor taught her to identify healthy vines from struggling ones, explained pruning techniques, talked about soil composition and sun exposure. Georgia's physical therapy background actually helped. She understood body mechanics, could see patterns in how the vines grew and what they needed for support. "You have a good eye," Connor said after she pointed out a section where the irrigation seemed uneven. "I spent years learning to assess how bodies move and what they need to function better. I guess plants are not that different." "That's actually brilliant. I never thought about it that way." They worked together through the afternoon, and Georgia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. Connor was patient, answering her endless questions without making her feel stupid. He was also, she could not help but notice, very attractive when he was focused on something, his whole face animated with enthusiasm. "Stop it," she told herself. "This is your business partner. Do not complicate things." But that night, sitting on the porch with a glass of wine Connor had opened from Raymond's personal collection, she felt something shifting inside her. For the first time in years, she felt excited about tomorrow. The next few weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of learning and work. Georgia threw herself into understanding every aspect of the vineyard. She spent mornings with Connor in the fields, learning to prune and train vines. Afternoons were devoted to the business side. going through Raymond's chaotic records, calling distributors, researching markets. The financial situation was even worse than Connor had initially indicated. They owed money to suppliers, the equipment was barely functional, and they had exactly 8 accounts still buying their wine, down from 30 the previous year. "We need something to differentiate ourselves," Georgia said one evening as they sat in the office, surrounded by paperwork. "Every vineyard in Napa makes Cabernet and Chardonnay. Why should anyone choose us?" Connor leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes tiredly. They had been working for 12 hours straight. Raymond used to make this incredible Petite Syrah, small batch hand-processed. He won awards for it 20 years ago. Why did he stop? Too labor-intensive, not profitable enough. Connor dropped his hands, looking at her. But it was exceptional, the kind of wine people remembered. Could we do it again? It would take everything we have. We would have to bet the entire harvest on it, and even then we might not break even for years. Georgia felt her heart racing. This was crazy. The sensible thing would be to keep doing what they were doing, try to slowly rebuild. But slow and steady was not going to save them in 6 months. "Let's do it," she said. Connor stared at her. "You understand what you are saying? If this fails, we lose everything. If we do nothing, we lose everything anyway. At least this way we go down swinging." Something flickered in Connor's eyes, respect mixed with something warmer. "You are braver than I expected, or more foolish. I have found they are often the same thing." Connor stood, extending his hand. "Partners?" Georgia shook his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the calluses from work. "Partners." They dove into preparations for the new approach. Connor contacted his old network from the wine industry, trying to generate advance interest. Georgia focused on the story, crafting a narrative about heritage, quality, and resurrection that could capture people's imagination. Late one night, working in the office while rain drummed on the roof, Connor brought in 2 glasses and a bottle. "We both need a break," he said, pouring. Georgia accepted the glass gratefully, rolling her shoulders to release the tension. Connor noticed the movement. "Your neck bothering you? Hazard of sitting hunched over a computer all day." "Here," Connor moved behind her chair. "May I?" Before she could fully process what was happening, his hands were on her shoulders, strong fingers finding the knots with practiced precision. Georgia nearly gasped at the sensation, warmth flooding through her. "How are you so good at this?" she managed to ask. "Used to get terrible tension headaches when I was banking. Learned massage to help." His thumbs worked into a particularly tight spot, and Georgia could not suppress a small sound of relief. "You carry a lot of stress." "I have a lot to be stressed about." "Fair point." His hands continued their work, and Georgia felt herself melting under the touch. This was dangerous territory. She knew it, but she could not bring herself to pull away. When Connor finally stepped back, the absence of his hands felt like a loss. Georgia turned to look at him and found his expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said softly. "Anytime." His voice was rougher than usual. He cleared his throat. "We should probably call it a night." Georgia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she headed upstairs, she could feel his eyes on her, and her skin still tingled where he had touched her. This was getting complicated. The harvest approached, and with it came the reality of their gamble. They had to bring in additional help, workers who cost money they barely had. Connor taught Georgia the art of selecting grapes at peak ripeness, and she found herself awed by his expertise. He could taste a single grape and tell her the exact sugar content, the acidity level, and whether it needed another day on the vine. "That's incredible," she said, watching him work. "Just practice, you will learn." He handed her a grape. "Try it, tell me what you taste." Georgia put the grape in her mouth, closing her eyes to focus. Sweet, obviously, thick skin. The inside is almost jammy. Good. What else? I do not know. It tastes like a grape. Connor laughed, the sound making her stomach flip. You are tasting with your brain, not your senses. Try again. Do not think about what it should taste like. Just experience it. She tried another grape, following his instruction. This time she noticed more. A hint of something dark and earthy, a brightness at the edges, a texture that was complex. When she described it, Connor's smile was genuine pride. You are a natural. I have a good teacher. They stood close in the vineyard, the sun warm on their faces, and Georgia became very aware of how Connor was looking at her, not like a business partner, like something more. Georgia, he started, then stopped. What? He seemed to struggle with something internal, then shook his head. We should keep checking the Sierra block. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a recognition that hung in the air like the sweet smell of ripening grapes. The harvest began on a Thursday morning when the sky was still dark. Georgia had never worked so hard in her life. She picked grapes until her hands ached and her back screamed, sorted fruit until her eyes blurred, helped Connor with the crushing process until she was covered in purple juice and exhausted beyond belief. But there was also something transcendent about it. Working side by side with Connor and the crew, all of them focused on this single purpose, felt elemental, ancient, real in a way her previous life had never been. On the third night of harvest, after the workers had gone home, Georgia and Connor sat on the crush pad, too tired to move, sharing a bottle of water. Thank you, Connor said quietly. For what? For taking this chance. For believing in this place. He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were luminous. For believing in me. You are easy to believe in, Georgia said, and meant it. Connor reached out, gently brushing a streak of grape juice from her cheek. The touch was feather light but sent electricity through her entire body. His hand lingered, cupping her face, and Georgia found herself leaning into the touch. We should not, Connor said, but he did not move away. Why not? Because we are partners. Because if this goes wrong, it could ruin everything we are building. And if it goes right, Connor's thumb traced her lower lip, then maybe we build something even better. He kissed her then, soft and tentative, giving her every chance to pull away. Georgia did not pull away. She leaned in, her hand coming up to tangle in his hair, and kissed him back with all the longing she had been suppressing for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Connor rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the day you decided to fight for this place, he admitted. I have wanted you to do that since you smiled at me in the vineyard that first morning, Georgia confessed. We are definitely complicating things. Good. I am tired of things being simple and terrible. Georgia pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But we have to promise to be honest with each other. No games, no secrets. If we are going to do this, we do it right. Connor nodded solemnly. I can promise you that. They kissed again, slower this time, and Georgia felt like she was falling and flying simultaneously. When Connor finally walked her to the main house, he kissed her goodnight at the door with a sweetness that made her knees weak. Sleep well, Georgia. You too, Connor. She watched him walk back toward the guest cottage, and as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she felt lighter than she had in years. Terrified, yes, but also thrilled. Alive. The next morning brought chaos. Georgia woke to find Connor in the kitchen on the phone, his face tight with anger. What happened? She asked when he hung up. Our bottling contractor just canceled. Apparently someone offered him double to handle their harvest instead. Can he do that? Legally, no. Practically, yes, because suing him would take longer than we have. Connor ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Without bottling, we cannot sell the wine. We are dead in the water. Georgia felt panic rising but forced it down. There have to be other contractors. In Napa during harvest season, they are all booked solid. Then we find another way. Georgia grabbed her laptop. What do we actually need? Connor explained the bottling process, and Georgia started researching. Mobile bottling units, equipment rentals, anything that could work. After 2 hours of dead ends, she found a possibility. A retired winemaker in Sonoma who had his own small bottling setup and sometimes took on side jobs. It is worth a shot, Connor said, though he sounded doubtful. They drove to Sonoma together, and Georgia pitched their situation to the old winemaker, a man named Frank who looked like he had been carved from oak. He listened with his arms crossed, expression skeptical. "Why should I help you?" Frank asked. "I am retired. I do not need the hassle." "Because we are making something special," Georgia said. "Because my uncle spent 40 years building this vineyard, and it deserves to continue. Because Connor here is one of the best winemakers in California, and this wine is going to remind people why they fell in love with Petite Sirah in the first place." Frank turned his attention to Connor. "You any good?" "I am very good," Connor said without arrogance. "And she is right. This wine is exceptional. You could be part of that." Frank studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "Let me taste it first." They drove back to Sunset Ridge, Frank following in his truck. Connor pulled a sample from the fermenting tanks, and Frank went through a tasting ritual that was almost religious in its intensity. Georgia held her breath, watching his face. Finally, Frank set down the glass. "That's damn good wine." "Does that mean you will help us?" Georgia asked. "It means I will think about it." But Frank was smiling slightly. "I will give you an answer tomorrow." After Frank left, Georgia paced the office anxiously while Connor watched with amusement. "He is going to say yes," Connor said. "How do you know?" "Because he is a winemaker, and winemakers cannot resist being part of something great." Connor caught her hand as she passed, pulling her to stop. "You were amazing today, the way you pitched to him." "I was desperate. You were passionate. There's a difference." Connor tugged her closer. "You continue to surprise me, Georgia Evans. Good surprises, I hope. The best kind." He kissed her, and Georgia felt the tension of the day melting away. When they broke apart, Connor's expression was serious. "I am falling for you, you should know that." Georgia's heart stuttered. "That is terrifying, completely." "I am falling for you too," she admitted. Connor's smile was brilliant. "Then we are both in trouble." They kissed again, and Georgia thought that if this was trouble, she never wanted to be safe. Frank called the next morning to say he would do the bottling. Georgia actually screamed with joy, causing Connor to come running from the winery building, convinced something was wrong. When she told him, he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "We might actually pull this off," Connor said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "We are definitely going to pull this off," Georgia corrected. They worked around the clock for the next 3 weeks, monitoring the fermentation, preparing for bottling, continuing to manage the existing business that barely kept them afloat. Georgia and Connor fell into a rhythm, working together during the day, stealing moments alone in the evening. Connor was an incredible partner in every sense. He treated her as an equal, valued her input, and never made her feel less capable despite her inexperience. He was also attentive and affectionate, leaving her coffee in the morning with little notes, checking in throughout the day, finding excuses to touch her hand or shoulder or back. One evening, he cooked her dinner at the guest cottage, and Georgia discovered he was as talented in the kitchen as he was in the winery. They ate pasta and drank wine while rain pattered outside, talking about everything and nothing. "Tell me about your family," Connor said. Georgia hesitated. "Not much to tell. My mom died when I was 10, like I mentioned. My dad remarried within a year and basically forgot I existed. I have a half-sister I barely know. I put myself through college and graduate school, worked constantly, and here I am. That must have been lonely. It was. Is. She met his eyes. Less so now. Connor reached across the table, lacing his fingers through hers. I am glad you are here. Me too. Georgia squeezed his hand. What about you? You mentioned your father. Both parents are still alive, living in Connecticut. I have two brothers, both in finance. Both think I am crazy for doing this. We are not particularly close. Connor's thumb traced patterns on her hand. They visited once, looked around the vineyard like they were slumming, and have not been back. Their loss. That is how I see it. Connor stood, pulling Georgia up with him. Dance with me. There is no music. Sure there is. He pulled her close, swaying gently, and Georgia could hear the rain, the wind, the beating of her own heart. Connor hummed softly, some melody she did not recognize, and she rested her head against his chest. This is nice, she murmured. This is everything, Connor corrected, his lips brushing her hair. They made love that night for the first time, slow and tender and incandescent. Connor was attentive and generous, making sure Georgia felt cherished. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed, Georgia felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Stay tonight, Connor said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin. Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything. Georgia stayed, falling asleep in his arms, and woke the next morning to find him watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. Good morning, beautiful. Good morning, she whispered back. They kissed, morning breath and all, and Georgia felt something settling deep in her soul. This was right. This was home. The weeks that followed were intense but joyful. Georgia split her time between the main house and Connor's cottage, and they settled into a relationship that felt both new and comfortable. They worked together seamlessly, challenging each other professionally while supporting each other personally. The wine continued to develop beautifully. Connor was meticulous about barrel selection, rotating and monitoring constantly. When he finally let Georgia taste it at 3 months, she was stunned by the complexity. Connor, this is incredible. It is good, he agreed, but she could see the pride in his eyes. It is better than good. This could really put us on the map. They began planning the release, deciding to host a tasting event at the Vineyard. It was risky, investing money they did not have, but they both felt it was necessary to generate buzz. Georgia threw herself into planning, calling in every favor she could, reaching out to wine bloggers and local press. Connor focused on perfecting the wine and preparing the winery for visitors. 3 days before the event, Georgia got a call from her half-sister, Heather, whom she had not spoken to in over a year. I heard about your inheritance, Heather said without preamble. Some vineyard in Napa. Hello to you too, Heather. Dad thinks you should sell it. He says you do not know anything about running a business. Georgia felt old anger stirring. Dad does not get a say in my life. He is just trying to help. We are family. Family shows up, Heather. Family does not disappear for years and then call with opinions. Georgia kept her voice level with effort. I am happy here. I am building something. With some guy you just met. Come on, Georgia. This sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Thank you for the vote of confidence. I have to go. She hung up, shaking with frustration. Connor found her a few minutes later, sitting on the porch steps. What is wrong? He asked, sitting beside her. Georgia explained the call, and Connor listened quietly. When she finished, he put his arm around her shoulders. Your father and sister are wrong about you. They have always been wrong about me. Does not mean it does not hurt. I know. Connor kissed her temple. But you are not alone anymore. You have me. And in 2 days, you are going to show everyone what you are capable of. Georgia leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. What if we fail? Then we fail together. but we are not going to fail. The day of the tasting event arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, warm but not hot, a gentle breeze that carried the scent of grapes and earth. Georgia woke early, nervous energy coursing through her. Connor was already up, having spent half the night making final preparations. When Georgia came downstairs, he pulled her into a long kiss. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know I am proud of you," he said. "You have worked incredibly hard. We both have. True. But you took a leap of faith when you could have walked away. That takes courage." They spent the morning setting up, arranging tables, preparing food, making sure every detail was perfect. Frank arrived early to help with the bottling station display, and several of their regular workers came to assist. By noon, guests started arriving. Local wine enthusiasts, a few distributors Connor had personally invited, 2 wine bloggers Georgia had convinced to attend, and a critic from a regional publication. Georgia greeted everyone, her nerves gradually settling as she fell into the role of hostess. Connor led the main tasting, explaining the history of Sunset Ridge, Raymond's legacy, and their vision for the future. When he poured the Petite Syrah, the room went quiet. Georgia watched faces as people tasted, looking for reactions. The silence stretched. Then one of the distributors, a woman named Patricia who had been in the business for 30 years, set down her glass and looked directly at Connor. "This is exceptional, truly exceptional. I have not tasted Petite Syrah this good in over a decade." A murmur of agreement went around the room. The critic was making furious notes. The bloggers were already typing on their phones. Georgia felt Connor's hand find hers, squeezing tightly. They had done it. The rest of the event passed in a blur of conversations and negotiations. By the time the last guest left, they had secured distribution contracts with 5 new accounts, including 2 high-end restaurants in San Francisco. The critic promised a feature article. The bloggers had posted glowing preliminary reviews. When the door finally closed behind the last person, Georgia turned to Connor and burst into tears. "Hey, what is this?" Connor pulled her close, alarmed. "These are happy tears, right?" "Yes, sorry, I just cannot believe it actually worked." She laughed through the tears. "We actually did it." "You did it. This was your vision." "Our vision," Georgia corrected. She pulled back to look at him. "I could not have done any of this without you." Connor cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. "I love you, Georgia. I know it is fast and maybe it is crazy, but I love you." Georgia's breath caught. She had known she was falling, but hearing the words made it real. Terrifying and wonderful and real. "I love you too," she whispered. Connor kissed her, deep and passionate, and Georgia felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Over the next few months, Sunset Ridge transformed. The distributor contracts brought in much-needed revenue. The critic's article generated national attention. Orders started pouring in faster than they could fill them. Georgia and Connor worked together to expand carefully, hiring additional staff, upgrading equipment, planning future plantings. They brought in a business consultant who helped them restructure their operations for efficiency. Georgia discovered she had a real talent for the business side, negotiating contracts and managing relationships with their growing network of accounts. Connor continued to focus on the winemaking, and together, they made decisions about the future of the vineyard. They also made decisions about their personal future. 6 months after the tasting event, Connor took Georgia to the highest point on the property at sunset. The vineyard spread below them, rows of vines turning gold in the fading light. "I have something to ask you," Connor said, taking her hands. Georgia's heart started racing. "Okay. This place, this life, I cannot imagine it without you. I do not want to imagine it without you." Connor dropped to one knee, pulling out a small box. "Georgia Evans, will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful, a simple diamond set in a band engraved with grapevines. But what took Georgia's breath away was the look in Connor's eyes, the absolute certainty and love. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, absolutely yes." Connor slipped the ring on her finger and stood, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her. Georgia wrapped her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at once. "I love you so much," she said against his lips. "I love you too. Forever." They were married 3 months later in the vineyard, surrounded by friends and the workers who had become like family. Georgia wore a simple white dress that flowed like water, and Connor could not stop smiling the entire ceremony. Frank officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Even Georgia's father and sister came, though their presence was awkward. But Georgia found she did not care. She had found her real family: Connor, this land, these people who had welcomed her. The reception was held in the winery, long tables set up between the barrels, everyone drinking Sunset Ridge wine and dancing to a local band. Connor pulled Georgia onto the makeshift dance floor, holding her close as they swayed. "Happy?" he asked, deliriously. "You." "I have everything I ever wanted right here in my arms." Georgia looked up at him, this man who had become her partner in every sense, and felt overwhelming gratitude. A year ago, she had been lost and broke and alone. Now she had a thriving business, a home, and a love that felt unshakable. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing something in me worth believing in." Connor's expression turned serious. "Georgia, you have always been worth believing in. I just feel lucky you let me be part of your story." They kissed while their friends cheered, and Georgia thought about her Uncle Raymond, whom she had barely known but who had given her this incredible gift. Not just the vineyard, but the chance to discover who she really was and what she was capable of. The business continued to grow. A year after their wedding, Sunset Ridge was profitable for the first time in a decade. They expanded their portfolio, adding a Zinfandel that critics raved about. Georgia negotiated a contract with a major distributor that put their wines in stores across 3 states. She also discovered she was pregnant on a warm afternoon in June. Connor had been in the barrel room when she found him, and the look on his face when she told him would stay with her forever. "We are having a baby?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "We are having a baby." Connor picked her up carefully, spinning her gently before setting her down and dropping to his knees to press his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your dad. I love you already." Georgia ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with emotion. This life she had stumbled into, this love she had found, felt like a miracle. Their daughter, Catherine, was born on a February morning when the vineyard was dormant, but the promise of spring hung in the air. She had Connor's gray-green eyes and Georgia's dark hair, and both of them fell instantly, completely in love. Connor was an incredible father, patient and gentle and fully present. He would carry Catherine through the vineyard in a sling, talking to her about the vines and the soil and the magic of making wine. Georgia would watch them and feel her heart expanding beyond what she thought possible. Catherine's 2nd birthday coincided with Sunset Ridge's most successful year yet. They hosted a party that was part celebration for their daughter and part harvest festival. The vineyard was packed with friends, employees, distributors, and wine lovers who had become loyal supporters. Georgia stood on the porch of the main house, watching Connor chase Catherine through the vines while she shrieked with delight, and Frank came to stand beside her. "Raymond would be proud," Frank said quietly. "You brought this place back to life." "Connor and I brought it back together," Georgia corrected. "I could not have done it alone. Maybe, but you were the one brave enough to try." Frank smiled at her. "Not many people would have taken this chance." "I did not feel brave at the time. I felt desperate and terrified. Best decisions often feel that way. Connor appeared with Catherine on his shoulders, both of them flushed and happy. There you are. Catherine wants Mama. Georgia reached up to take her daughter, who immediately grabbed her hair and babbled something about grapes. Connor wrapped his arm around Georgia's waist, and they stood together watching the party, watching the vineyard that had become their shared dream. "Remember when you asked me if I wanted to fight or cash out?" Georgia asked. "Of course. Best question anyone ever asked me." Connor kissed her softly. "Best answer anyone ever gave me." They went back to join the party, but Georgia paused at the edge of the porch to look out over Sunset Ridge one more time. The vines stretched toward the horizon, heavy with fruit. The winery hummed with activity. Their home glowed with light and laughter. She had inherited a failing vineyard and a business partner. What she had found was a purpose, a passion, and a love that had transformed her entire life. The scared, broke woman who had arrived here 3 years ago felt like a different person. That Georgia had been surviving. This Georgia was living fully, loving completely, building something that would last. Connor appeared beside her again, reading her mood with the intuition born of deep connection. "You okay?" "I am perfect." Georgia laced her fingers through his. "Absolutely perfect." They walked back to the party hand in hand, toward the sound of music and laughter, toward the life they had built together. Catherine reached for Connor, who took her and lifted her high, making her giggle. Georgia watched her husband and daughter, surrounded by friends and the vineyard that had saved her, and felt a peace she had spent most of her life searching for. This was her legacy now. Not just the wine or the land or the business, but this family, this love, this sense of belonging that had seemed impossible just a few short years ago. She had taken a chance on a failing vineyard and found everything she had never known she needed. The sun set over Sunset Ridge, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, and Georgia knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. With Connor, with Catherine, with this land that had become her home and her heart. The inheritance her uncle had left her was more than property. It was a future, a family, and a love story she would treasure for the rest of her life. Connor caught her eye across the crowd and mouthed the words, "I love you." Georgia mouthed them back, feeling the truth of them resonate in her bones. This was her happily ever after, built on hard work and hope and the willingness to take a leap of faith. And as the party continued into the night, Georgia made a silent promise to her Uncle Raymond, wherever he was. She would honor his legacy by continuing to make exceptional wine, by treating this land with respect, and by filling these acres with love and laughter. She would raise her daughter to understand the value of perseverance and passion. She would grow old with Connor, making wine and memories in equal measure. The failing vineyard had become a success. The business partnership had become a marriage. And Georgia had finally found the home she had been searching for all along, in the last place she ever expected to look. In the soil and sun of Napa Valley, in the arms of a man who saw her clearly and loved her completely. In the simple daily miracle of work that mattered and love that lasted. This was her story, and it was beautiful.